What does life look like when we try to forge our way with what we want? What is the driving force behind our endeavor? And how does grace help us turn around? Welcome to CWS Christian Writing and Speaking. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson. And today's guest is an award winning journalist and editor who has published over 1,000 articles. She is also the author of the book, Damaged Goods, a devotional for the slightly imperfect. She is a wife, mother, Gigi, as well as a dog mom. And as we delve into our discussion, we will tackle what it's like to live beyond the shattered dreams, what it's like to start over, and what it is to release to God's will. Let's welcome to the CWS stage, Miss Stacy Barnes. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate it.
I think your topic is so important and one that so many people can relate to. What do we do when our dreams have been shattered and then we try to hold on? We're not allowing God to come in and then finally have that breakthrough moment of just, okay, God, I will let you do this your way. We know you have a story. We want to hear the backstory, and then we'll
Yeah.
delve into your book.
Okay. So, yeah, my story starts in this very tiny town in the Bible Belt. And I was raised in church. And I feel like that was such a blessing to have Christian parents who took me to church. I mean, I was there every time the doors were open Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. I worked in the bus ministry. I mean, so I was very, involved and very into it. And then at some point, as you're going along, sometimes you start to kind of get off track, right? And so that happened with me. And right after high school, I ended up getting pregnant, and the church's response to that really kind of threw me for a loop because I lived, in like I said, in this very very small town, so everybody knew everyone, and everybody knew I was a Christian and that I was also very active in my church. And so I made a mistake, and it was a very public mistake. And so instead of like, the church kind of coming alongside you and rebuking you and kind of lovingly restoring you, I was met with uh, radio silence and gossip. So it was just absolute. It really threw me for a loop because no one, my pastor, my youth pastor, my Sunday school teacher, no one came to talk to me. Nobody's called me, nothing. But then I did know that I was the source of gossip because, word gets around. So it was just such a weird time. And so, because on the one hand, I was I was excited for my future because, I was young and naive, and I thought, "Oh, hey, I love this man, and we're gonna be married, and I'm gonna get out of this little town and just start my whole future." And so I was so looking forward to that. And then the other side of me, I felt ashamed. I was sad that I had damaged my testimony. I knew I had hurt people, family, friends, and people that I was very close to. So I was kind of living in this really strange time. And so as time went on, I got married and I had the baby, and I went through kind of a series of things. My husband started becoming controlling, and he became very abusive and very verbally abusive, very emotionally, some physical abuse as well. And so it was really, I had no clue that he had never showed that side of himself before. And so I was just very again, very shocked at, what is happening? How did I get here? And so I felt like for a series of time, I just went through one thing after another. I had a miscarriage. I was going through that abuse. I felt, I had such low self-esteem, and I was very isolated at the time. My daughter became very, very sick, and we didn't know what was wrong with her. And then when we did find out, the prognosis was not great. And so I just felt like it was just one thing after another, and I would just get through one wave and then another one would come crashing down. And so it was during that time that I really got back to, my roots as a Christian and my belief in Jesus. And I started really through all that. I prayed, and I just really tried to restore that relationship. And through that, that's kind of where the story that I wrote kind of came out of, because it was because the book itself is actually these stories that I went through.
Because you didn't stay married to that man, right?
Right. He asked for a divorce when I was 7 months pregnant with our son. Mm.
And so you had 4 children, and then you did meet someone else and married. You all been married for, like, over 30 years now, I understand.
Yeah, so I had 2 children with my first
Okay.
husband, and then I remarried, and we have 2 children together. And so, yes, we have 4 children and 6 grandchildren. So, and yes, we've been married for 31 years. And so that was such a huge blessing for me, because I didn't I did not think that I would meet a person who I came from a culture that people did not get divorced.
Mm,
And I still don't, I'm not a big proponent of divorce. I mean, I think if God's bringing people together, you should be together, right? But I do think that if I had stayed in that marriage, I don't know that I would be here today. And so I think that I had to get out. And, my husband was actually the one who asked for the divorce, which is, it's kind of sad as I look back at it and I think, why was I willing to stay there? But there actually came a point, and I do talk about it in the book, that I made the decision that I'm not going back, because we had separated and come back and forth a couple times. I think people do that, right? And I just told him, we're not, I'm not coming back. We're done. And because I was pregnant with my son, and he got upset with me, and he picked me up by my throat off the ground, and I couldn't breathe. And it was dark, and I was hoping that my daughter hadn't seen it, but after he left, she touched my neck, and she was 3, and she said, "Why daddy hurt your neck?" And I was like, "Okay, I'm not raising my children in this home. They are not going to see this. They're not gonna remember this. This is not going to be part of their story." And so, it was at that moment that I made the decision that this could not be restored. We could not be saved. And so, like I said, it had been several years. I was divorced. I had tried to date. It was a fiasco, you know, tried to kind of do it my own way. And what was interesting about that is that, I was thinking, okay, I'll meet these guys, I'll date these guys, whatever. But it wasn't until my dad and we had a conversation, and I just said, I'm asking you to please pray with me that I would meet the right person if I'm supposed to remarry. Maybe I'm not supposed to remarry, but if I am, you know, please pray that I meet the right person who's a Christian, who can be a stepdad, or more than a stepdad, an actual dad to these children, and who loves the Lord. And so we agreed together to pray. And it wasn't long after that I met my husband. And that, like I said, we've been married for 30 years, and I 100% know that God brought us together.
I love it. Such a wonderful story of restoration. And as you mentioned, you get into your story more in your book, and I love
Mhm.
your subtitle. It's for the slightly perfect person. What will people find inside of your book?
So the book is a devotional, and I wanted it to be the stories, really, that they're God's stories, in my opinion. It's really my testimony of how God really restored me, and how He's done things in my life. And you know how sometimes you don't even realize that God's at work. You don't even know until you get to the other side of it and you turn around and you're like, oh, God was in the midst of that. And so the stories are short. They don't take very long. And then at the end of each chapter, I have some personal reflection questions. I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not trying to interpret the Bible for people. What my hope and prayer is that it will encourage others to get back into the word, or to just get in the word, read the stories, and come up with their own answers as to what God is, telling them through the stories.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And out of all of those stories, what have you found to be the most profound, or what have you found that others have found to be the most profound?
So it's been interesting, because it depends on who I talk to. I've had some single moms that have talked to me, and that's really been key for them. I have a whole Sunday school class of single women who've reached out, and they're doing the study together as, they're doing it as a Bible study together, because they really love that part about being single and how God, worked through that time in my life. And then I've had other people who've just said, you know, I didn't go through exactly the same thing, but I went through similar things and similar hurts, and I've had these same feelings. And so I've had a lot of people reach out, and even I wrote the book, mainly for women. And I was really thinking that's my audience, but I've had women say, I'm giving this to my son. I think this will help my son. And so to me, that's been, it's been a huge blessing to hear what people have said. But the biggest thing for me has been when people reach out and say, "It's encouraged me to get back on track because of you." I had somebody reach out to me and she said, "I was so depressed that I would come home from work and I would just get on TikTok, get in my PJs in bed, get on TikTok and spend my evenings there." And she was like, "I just felt all these feelings that you're describing in the book, I was feeling." And so she's like, "And now I come home, I read the book, I read the Bible, and I feel so much like I'm so encouraged. And I feel so much better. And my relationship with the Lord is better than it's been in a long time." And she even ended up starting her own little small business. And I'm not taking credit for any of that, but I just think that that to me has been a huge blessing, just to have people reach out and just tell me the little stories of how something has resonated with them and impacted them and caused them to want to get back into their relationship with the Lord, because that's really all I've ever wanted from that.
And also, I think it demonstrates the power of us actually telling our stories. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that you felt shame.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we allow that shame to keep us from telling people what's going on, or why we are acting the way that we're acting. And can you speak to that for a moment for somebody who says, I'm going through something similar to what she has experienced, but I'm feeling so shame. I don't feel
Mhm.
like I have anyone to turn to. What would you say to them?
I felt like that for so many years. And the churches that I went to, if you were divorced, you automatically felt like you had this, letter, almost like that scarlet letter on your chest, and you were labeled. And I felt like you were treated differently. And so I totally understand that. And I would look around and I would think, this person, God can really use her. She's perfect. She's never made a mistake, whatever. And I think that's such a lie from the devil, because God wants to use the imperfect people. If you look at who Jesus chose for his disciples, he didn't go and choose the Pharisees. He didn't go and choose people who never made mistakes. He chose regular people, people who sinned and people who made mistakes, just people who were devoted and who loved him, because that's really what he wants, is our devotion and our love. And so I think there is just nothing that you can do that you cannot be redeemed. And I think you have to remember that, like, remember who you are and whose you are. That was so empowering for me when I was at my lowest point, to just get back in the Bible and remember, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God loves me for me. It doesn't matter what anybody else in this world thinks. And I do have this saying that I like, that, that our scars, our wounds become scars and our scars become stories. And those stories are our testimony. And I think that that's so important, that we are willing to be transparent and share that. People right now, today, I think people want to have this Instagram story life, right? And we want to put that out there. But it's really when we get honest and open that we can make those connections, and we can really, I think, advance the cause for Christ, because that's when we really connect with people. Nobody's getting through life unscathed. I don't care if you think you've never made a mistake, like, there's something in your background that, that's thrown you off track or whatever. So I think that God loves to redeem us and restore us.
And then speaking to that, one of the things, going back to when you say you got pregnant and it was like you felt like that was just the end for a moment.
Mhm.
But then we have so many people who are facing that type of situation. And what would you say to them?
Well, I think that, God doesn't make mistakes in that respect. I look at my daughter and my grandchildren, and I would never for 1 minute change the decisions that I made, or the way that looking back, how could you change that? Because, I wouldn't have the daughter that I have if I hadn't done the things that I'm not condoning the sin, and I'm not condoning what happened. But I think that, once something's done, it's done. you have to ask for forgiveness and you have to get back on track, because I think the devil wants nothing more than to keep us away from, once we're Christians, once we're saved, in my mind, we're saved. And the only thing that's gonna derail us is us ourselves really allowing us to not be used for Christ. And so I think that we can, it to me, like I'm a once saved, always saved person. So for me, no matter, what I do believe in, asking for forgiveness and things like that. I'm not saying that I could just go do anything I want to do. But I'm saying that once you are kind of in that, once you're in God's hand, I believe that you're there, and that nobody's going to come and take you away. But Satan can derail you and keep you from really bringing glory to God and really sharing your testimony and bringing others along with you on your way to heaven. And I think, we're here to glorify God. So we're here to be Jesus' hands and feet and show God's love to others while we're here. So I think that it's really important that we not get caught up in what other people think about us, and not let, Satan get in our head and keep us from doing what we should really do.
Yeah, and I love that. I think people often forget that sin is sin in God's eyes.
Mhm.
We are the ones that place labels on what's the worst. And let me say this, there are some sins that always have more consequences than others. But it is so important as the church. Christ always emphasized restoration. And what you're seeing a lot of is people pushing people out because they did this. But if
Mhm.
we were to go into everybody's closet, there is something that's
Right.
wrapped around in their closet. We just haven't seen it yet.
Right.
And we have a responsibility as Christians to say, how can I walk alongside this person? Like you said, you were looking for people. And I'm thinking about, what if that continued rejection would have led you into a totally different direction? And
Right.
so we just have to be more responsible with the power that God has given us, and know that restoration is the key to it all. And then I look at your situation, you got pregnant, but I also think about the testimony that you have. And we go through tests, and we're all at different spiritual levels. And
Mhm.
I try to emphasize that to people. Just because you're at one place and that no longer tempts you, you don't know where someone else is. So it's important to stay aware of that. And this is why I think it's important for people to share stories like yours, to show that restoration is in fact possible. And then you can go on and still live the life that God has called you to live. But one of the things that you mentioned when I was going through your bio, you was talking about the sweet spot, finding that sweet place where you are just resting in who God has called you to be. Speak to that. And then I want to hear more about what's next for you.
Okay. So really, one of the things that prompted me to write this book at this time was I was in that place where I'm looking at my life and I'm just thinking, what a blessing. How blessed am I? I have a wonderful husband, I have a fabulous family. And if you were to just meet me now, look at me from outside, you would never know the things that I went through when I was younger. And I really felt convicted that, there are other people out there struggling, and there are people that are going through things that maybe they're younger, maybe they're the same age, maybe they're older, but they're dealing with some of the same things I dealt with, or even if it's not the same thing, they're dealing with the same feelings. And, how could my testimony, how could God use my testimony? And I just really started feeling that conviction that I should share it. And so I just thought that, what, I'm going to write this. And it's uncomfortable. I A lot of it was hard to write, and I had to relive some of it, and there were tears, and some of it I felt like I was almost going back through the whole thing. And so it was difficult, but I'm really trusting that, I'm following the Lord and sharing this, and I've had nothing but, positive response so far. And even if I get negative response, I am at that spot in my life that I understand that no one else's opinion really matters. I'm sharing what God has done for me, and I'm hoping and praying that blesses other people and helps impact other people in a positive way. and I just have to, go with it. And I think that people can get to that. You know how they talk about having joy, like you're not always happy, every day, but you always have that inner joy and you always have that inner peace. And I think that that's something that Christians understand and can resonate with. And that's just kind of where I was, and that's kind of what I was talking about.
Yeah, I love it. What's next for you?
So for me, I am looking at right now, I've been kind of talking about this book and promoting this book, and but I am looking at writing another book that I think would hopefully also be impactful for parents. So I haven't fleshed it out. I'm working on the outline. So it'll be a minute.
And how can people connect with you?
So I have a website. It's Stacy K. It's KAYE books.com. And I'm on Amazon. I did write under a pen name. So it's Stacy K, KAYE. So you can find it on Amazon, the book. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram. You know, I'm pretty much everywhere.
Wonderful. Make sure you all connect with her. Now, what is your final word for the audience?
I think that it's important, the big thing for me has been to tell people that, that God knows you, he sees you, and he loves you, and that there's just really not anything that you can do that cannot be redeemed. I think that's really important that we remember no matter where we are.
I love it. CWS audience, you have heard her. And I just want to again echo what she said. No matter what mistake you have made, you have a chance for redemption. Sometimes the church makes a mistake and they do not take the actions that they need to take to help restore you. But it doesn't mean that God is not waiting there with his arms open for you to be restored. And there is nothing that can truly separate you from his love. So if you find yourself in a situation and you're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know if they will accept me, God still accepts you. And I want you to run to him and I want you to start your restoration process. And then once you are finished with that, I want you to go and tell your story because it will be a testimony and it will be a guide to help someone else come out of their mistake. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And until next time, beautiful people, God bless.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Thanks again, and see you next time.